for some reason, I was reminded of this article I read a long time ago from the Atlantic that talked about how teachers of color have a very short span in terms of staying in the workforce as teachers. And the reason why was because there is this obvious internalizing of issues like the achievement gap and this personalization and this sort of like extra burden that you carry in your shoulders because you totally relate and you totally identified and you've been there. And so it is so much harder. The burnout rate is so high because it just wanes on you. And so I first want to acknowledge what this means for Councilmember Joando and Councilmember Rice as Black men in this country. I know that this is a heavy burden. And I think sometimes it's hard because, as elected officials of color, you gotta be sharp and you gotta be on top of things and you gotta come up with all the policies and you have to be strategic and you have to be all these things. And then you go home and you have to face your children and you wanna protect them. And when they're little, you wanna protect them from all the microaggressions that they're gonna face. And then when they grow up, you wanna protect them in the job place. And it's just a constant battle, an internal battle. I'm gonna confess, the first time I went to Canada with I think my daughter was turning 10, all of a sudden I realized that I wasn't feeling this heaviness. We went through a little village outside of Montreal to get some poutine in a little diner, and there were like 17 of us. And I was already thinking, oh my God, here we are, like 17 of us, we're all like Black people and brown people, we're like taking over this diner. And we walk in and they're just like, welcome. And, so I was already conditioned. And I say that because there is this relentless pressure day to day that nobody really talks about, but it's there. And so I want to acknowledge you and I want to tell you that I appreciate you because I know how tough this is. I also want to say that, this bill in many ways puts forth particular policies that are just common sense. When people watch these videos, like everybody asks the same question, right? Like, was that necessary? Like, how come they did that? And you have to be factual, but then when you look at the disproportionality, you see and you understand that if you're going to look at it from an analytical perspective, it was not necessary because the same thing is not happening in other communities. So the de-escalation is happening when you're dealing with what members of the white, communities, but for some reason, this disproportionality we see in so many different areas with our communities of color, it doesn't make sense. So to me, this is why this is an important bill. It adds to the body of work that we have taken up until now, that this council has been really relentless in addressing. I am so inspired by that. I am really, really motivated by that. I know that we are making a difference for those young, elected officials of color that one day will come through to then continue the work, because this is about continuous improvement. But we are at a precipice, like Councilmember Joando said, we're at a turning point, and it is both overwhelming and it's also inspiring. So again, I thank my colleagues of color, and I thank the rest of my colleagues who are allies and are important, I think, also leaders in making sure that we make this county truly what it should be. That this county that is a microcosm of our country and the world continues to be such an amazing place, right? And so when you make that little list of all the things that we are doing, including that consent calendar that somebody said was chock full of great things, and all of this together adds to the greatness of this county, because it also addresses the issue of equity and leveling the playing field and opportunities. And so all those other pieces that may be outside of this particular bill also make a difference. And everyone has their imprint on every of this. So thank you very much for allowing me to work on this with you, Councilmember Joanna, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Bornos, and everybody else. I look forward to many of the further conversations. And I'll lastly say this. Councilmember Rice brought a very important point, because we do need to reimagine policing. I do agree with that. I also want to be, fair and say that we do have many police officers who are doing everything possible to be that kind of example. And I know that in many communities in our county, there's so many folks who are are specifically being victimized by organized crime, right? I mean, we know that. And we need to make sure we find that balance. But I do agree 100% that we need to reimagine policing, and we need to work on that, and it is possible. So thank you.